was. It's kind of heartbreaking now to think back on it and the things that were challenging during that time period, especially when those times whenever you almost take for granted those Sundays. You remember those Sunday dinners?
Every Sunday. It was exactly the
Sunday.
same. And I mean, the stuff would change up, whether it be like roast or anything else under the sun, or pork chops, and like chicken or anything. I mean, it was
y'all at least changed it up a little bit.
Yeah.
We had the same canned ham because of Cliff. We would have a different ham sometimes, and then we would have a chicken.
There you go.
And then of course the regular fixings.
Yep. Because you'd have different sides too, but two of the main ones you'd always have was, most of the time it was always macaroni. It was a baked macaroni, and then you always had rice every single meal. Didn't matter what it was always rice.
Hold on now, before you go to this, because there's some people that talk about macaroni and cheese and they don't understand the goodness of a baked macaroni and cheese. So tell me a little bit about that, because I'm a big boy. I used to love my grandma's mac and cheese.
Yeah, and it was a certain pan that she used, and it was this beat up
like
looking black, a deep black looking dish that she had.
Ours was a white. My grandma had a white dish that had it was some kind of little beige. I don't even remember what it was, but it looked like a beige star.
Yeah.
That was in the front of it. That just looked like that. But man, just tell us more about it.
I mean, it was like a good. I mean, you could scrape the top, and you could hear it like it was a little crust on the top of it, like that. And I mean, it was just, I have yet to have another macaroni like that. I've also have yet to find like butter beans cooked the way Grandma cooked them. And
with a little bit of ham hock.
Yeah, and like I think that's one of the things that I take for granted, or took for granted the most, was her cooking, and not getting like how she cooked it, because you'd ask her how she cooked it, and she was like, "Oh, I just put a little bit of this in there," or and it's like she didn't have measuring cups; she just eyeballed it, And
Grandma Lillie would write stuff down for Mom.
And so I wish I could have gotten that stuff, because I wish I could cook butter beans the way she cooked it, or anything else, or that macaroni the way she cooked it, And
Nikki may be able to help you out with that, just a little bit, because I think that our grandmothers cooked it about the same.
Okay.
So Nikki might be able to help you with that. She had about 5 or 6 things that she definitely wanted us to remember that she cooked.
Okay.
That was one of them.
Okay.
And Nikki, I believe, made it was pretty cool, with Grandma's handwriting on it, and how she actually wrote out the recipe. And she wrote out that recipe for macaroni and cheese. I believe it's macaroni and cheese.
Okay.
But it has her handwriting, everything on it, and Nikki bought it from Mom probably about a good 6 years ago, I think. And it's still over at Mom's house, and it's just sitting there on the counter. If I remember rightly, Nikki might have taken it home by now at her house.
Take a picture of it.
I'll do that. I'll do that. But yes, I could say that I probably took advantage of the same thing. Just, it wasn't just that, but man, I could think of Cliff joking around too. I can think of Grandma joking at the dinner table about what happened at church that day, and how they would talk about it. Papa would have his face buried into the food until then, and then get up. And as soon as he would get up, he would go to his seat and just read the paper. That would be Sunday until the race would be on.
Yep.
And that was the race or a football game.
Yep.
One of the two. There was never both. So it was a good time. And man, I can say that Sundays now, I mean, it's sad, because you get up and you go to a restaurant instead of going home and eating with a group of family, and that sense of togetherness.
Yeah.
And I know that's a strange word to put out there, as togetherness, but man, I think we're really losing that.
And I mean, they still get together.
over at Al and Linda's house
Okay.
on Sundays, which is still good, and I do enjoy it, but it just isn't the same
I get that.
with them there.
I get that.
And you know, because Grandma always had her spot. Because originally, back in the day, when they all sat at the table, at the dinner table, Papa was always at the front, and then Grandma sat at the one behind that. And then eventually, when she kind of slow down from cooking and everything, she would sit in that recliner,
Yeah.
and then they would just bring her plate, and she would just sit in that recliner, and she would just thank you. You know, y'all didn't have to do that, or
Y'all
or
go ahead and eat.
yeah, and
'Cause
then
I used to eat with y'all sometimes.
yeah,
I remember that.
and she would be like, "Go get you some more," and she's like, "I know you didn't have enough." Like,
Well, she would tell it to me,
Yeah.
but I just thought she was just thought I was fat. I mean, this big old boy coming over to my house to eat, he better eat.
yeah, and we would bring and I laugh because we when I was working down at the beach at the FFA camp
Yes.
back in the day, Cody and I were both working there, and we brought one of our coworkers with us,
Huh?
and he wanted, because we kept talking about Grandma's cooking on Sundays, and he's like, "I'm a go." Well, it just so happened that I think it was his girlfriend at the time, wife now, she was from Sumter, and she was coming to do something other with family,
Okay.
and so he had come down that weekend, but then he knew he was going back to the camp with us that day, so she dropped him off over at the church with
Okay.
us, and then he just went from church
Well, that had to be
to us.
experience
Yeah,
there.
well,
to
he
go from-
came after. He came after church.
after church.
He came
Okay,
after church.
So that had to be an experience
And-
because sometimes we had to explain.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a Long Branch.
Yeah.
You have to be okay with this.
Yeah, and so, but he came after, so we picked him up. She dropped him off right there in the parking lot, and then he rode with us to Grandma's house.
Okay.
And then we got there, and we finished eating and everything, and it was hilarious because like he asked me beforehand. He's like, "Hey," he's like, "You mind if like I would dip in there?" And you know he had his bottle and everything, so he's spitting in his bottle. And so before he did that though, he looked at her and he said, "Ma'am," he said, "do you mind if I dip in your house?" And he like said, "I got a bottle," and she said, "Baby, I do the same thing." She held her cup out, her spit cup, where she chewed tobacco with Levi Garrett.
Yes.
And so
Her and Mary used to
Yeah.
chew it too. That's what I remember, man. I
Yeah.
remember Levi Garrett.
Levi Garrett.
That and Papa used to chew Red Man before Grandma got at him.
Yeah.
Because one of our relatives actually passed, if I remember rightly, with with more of mouth cancer and throat cancer because of it. And man, Grandma was adamant about him not chewing tobacco at all after that, and he would actually have it out there in his. I'm probably telling something that shouldn't tell, but it's all right. He was in his. You remember the Big Ben truck he used to have? They used to go hunting with.
Yeah.
That was that GMC. No, it was a Chevy. It was a Chevy Blazer, and it was kind of like a beige color Chevy Blazer that he had, and he would go hunting with that Chevy Blazer. Now, he would hide everything that he wanted to do in that Chevy Blazer. And Grandma found out one time, and both she went out there, dumped everything out, and I'll never forget that because I watched that, and I got tickled because it was Grandma was sitting there chewing them out. And he wasn't even home.
It's like she did that for years, and she had started it. I think when she said she was 10 years old, and so they grew up on the farm back in the day.
Yeah.
And she would bug her daddy about having some, and he would say, "No, baby, you don't need to do that. You don't need to do that." And she said she had bugged him so much that he finally said, "Go ahead then," and she did that at 10 years old.
10 years old.
And just kept on doing it.
So you mentioned something that's really not brought up as much nowadays in our family, and probably going to touch a subject that's going to hurt a lot of people whenever we say it like this. But man, it's our family, and this is our experience. Our family back. Whenever you say Benenhaley, we think of a lot of things as far as Turk. And I know this is welcome to Turkville. Some people may want to change it to a way that they believe. But what we know in our hearts, what we've talked about before, is that we have a lineage that we have to respect.
Right.
And what we respect is that our family believe that we were part of the Turkish people. And some of the things that they actually did have to go through in order to be where we are today.
Right.
A lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people don't realize what they had to go through for us to even sit right here in USC Sumtersville, and to think of that and what we've come from to who we are now. And the Turkish people have gone through a lot. Did your grandmother ever speak of some of the things that she had to go through?
I mean, I know that there was a school back in the day specifically for the Turks.
Grandma spoke of it too.
And I'm pretty sure she had went a long time, but she didn't finish out everything. That was the thing. And so even Papa, I think he had like a second or third grade education. That was it. And so, I mean, Papa couldn't even read. Now, Grandma could read eventually. And she went further than he did. But with both of them, and I don't know how Papa even got around, because he couldn't read, but he drove trucks his whole life.
Yeah.
And I don't know how he got around the state and read signs or knew how to read a map. And I think he just went off of like different places around town, so he could tell you like where something was at. He went off of different landmarks of where stuff was at.
Well, I still do that
And
now.
that's
even
what
with
I
the GPS.
do. Yeah. But but I do remember her talking about that one time, and she had said, that she had always just heard that Joseph Benenhaley had sailed over here across the sea and ended up settling in Dazzell for helping General Thomas Sumter. That was the story that I had always heard, or heard Grandma always talk about.
It was more of word of mouth.
Right, and it was just an oral translation that happened from each generation that was passed down. And that's
Correct.
the same thing that Grandma would say. She said, well, that's just what I've always heard, And so that's what we took it at. I mean, it was just passed down.
You can't deny that.
Right,
though. I mean,
correct.
because even though that was how, even just going back to the Bible, how do you think half of these stories actually came about? Is word of mouth.
Right.
But yet, it's crazy because you can have something that's even written from Daniel that corresponds with something in Revelation, and that word of mouth didn't travel that far for it to change, because it would almost be like a telephone effect.
Right.
So if there's a telephone effect, something would change along the way.
Right.
Nothing changed.
But yeah, that's what I was about to
And
say.
that
It
same
seemed
thing with
like-
our lineage,
Yeah.
whenever we do the background of it, man, since you did the background of it, everything I hear that you guys do, man, it almost corresponds with what we have going on, just not where we're from,
Right.
as far as that goes. I mean, there's a section, of course, from Northern Africa and Turkey that's almost there, but it would almost explain why it would be Northern Africa instead of Turkey. A lot of people don't realize where North Africa is.
Right.
And they always think of Africa being
And I
different.
actually had a professor here at USC Sumter explain that one time. He said, Alex, and I was explaining my DNA and ancestral roots and stuff like that. He said, Alex, he said, well, you know why that is, right? He said, think about it. And this is a professor of history here at University of South Carolina, Sumter. And so he is credentialed. He is
Yes.
a tenured faculty member and is very skilled in, native tribes and different tribes within Africa and the Middle East and all that. I mean, that is what he did his dissertation in. And so he explained, he said, well, Alex, he said, your DNA has a high percentage of North African because North Africa back in the day used to be part of the Ottoman Empire. He said, so they were conquered by the
It's
Turks.
world
then.
history.
Yes.
People don't realize world history 101, man.
And so they were
Especially
conquered.
whenever you're in college.
Right.
College world history is a little bit different.
It's a
but
little
man,
bit,
it's
yeah. And so he was explaining, he said, North Africa was part of the Ottoman Empire back then. He said, so if you were part of that tribe or part of that empire, then that is what you said you were. You claimed that you were. So
But not only that, because of the trades.
Right.
Then. I mean, back in that day, especially whenever we talk about, because I mean, it's even brought up in biblical terms.
right.
Biblical terms, whenever you actually look at everything there and during that time period, man, it was.
Yeah.
It was. I love this because the Bible actually shows us so much more than people realize, and showing that trade route that's almost there, especially through Acts. I mean, that trade route shows right then and there almost
Yeah.
where our lineage would almost be at, what you're talking about, and why they would be there.
You draw a straight line from North Africa across the Atlantic, you land right in South Carolina.
Legit.
Legit. And that, that is probably why. And that's how you have that high percentage, because it was probably from actual North Africa where your ancestors were from. They were just part of the Ottoman Empire, which makes a whole lot of sense, And I mean, like I said, there's other percentages that do spread into the Middle East and Turkey. But like I said, the biggest percentage is North African. And it's not Native American, it's not black or anything else, or African American. It is North
I'd
African.
say that Grandma did the same thing as far as sitting us down, but I can tell you some of the hurtful stories that she actually told.
Oh
me
yeah.
Of man, when she was part of that school or whatever, a normal bus. I say normal, but whenever a bus full of back then white people would come by, they would just yell out and throw rocks and throw things at them and call them turkey gobblers. And I remember Grandma doing the voice of the turkey gobbler. She would just go off like that. Man, it hurt to see her tell that because you could see the tears in her eyes whenever she would tell it. And then I really wish somebody would have kept, and I don't know if they have, the license, the driver's license that had Turk written across it. Or
Yeah, I think some of them still.
pictures even.
Yeah, they
I
have.
didn't mean to stop
No,
you.
you're fine.
And pictures even of if we were here back in that time. I mean, the water fountains. Like they always talk about the water fountains that had like black and white and stuff like that, nor the bathrooms and stuff like that. But they had a third one here in Sumter for Turks, and people don't realize that.
Yeah, well,
that
even
we were segregated that bad.
Yeah, because I remember a story that Grandma told, and she said there was a guy, and I guess it was a cousin. I don't know who it was, but I guess back in the day, and they had went to go to the theater, and just went to go watch a movie, and they went to the white theater, and they said, "Well, son, you can't come in here because you're black." And he said, "Well, I'm not black. I'm Turk." He said, "Well, you're not white, so you can't come in here." And so he left and went to the black theater and went to try to watch a movie with blacks. And he said, he went up there and he said, "Son, you can't come in here because you're white." He said, "I'm not white." And they said, "Well, you ain't black because you can't come in here." So he couldn't get into either theater.
Couldn't go to anything.
Yeah, couldn't see anything. And so
I don't pay my money. Let me sit down somewhere.
And so, yeah, and I guess too, I didn't necessarily get to hear a lot of those stories because I guess I was just younger. And by the time I got older,
I think a lot of them didn't want to tell us those stories, to be
No.
honest with you.
And that's what I was about to say.
We're
I
running
don't-
out. We're running out of time to where a lot of people don't want to speak of this stuff.
Right.
And we are running out of elders. Like I believe we have Mary, which is Harold's mama, that can still tell us stories. There's a couple of others that can tell us some stories,
Yeah.
but not many. I'd love to sit down with Lois. Aunt Lois is a wonderful, wonderful woman to sit down with. Aunt Annie could probably tell us some stories. I know she's not here yet, but I mean, Aunt
Yeah.
Annie.
Just saying anybody's an aunt, or
Pretty much.
like everybody called Grandma Aunt Lillie. And
Yes.
So everybody called her, and she might not have been their aunt, but they
I
called her Aunt
called
Lillie.
her Aunt Laura.
Yeah.
I will say that I did call her Aunt Laura. I was one of those ones that I don't know what it was, but man, I would sit next to your grandmother so many Sundays until Grandma came from the choir,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would go back with Grandma and Papa and sit down with
Yeah.
them. But man, it was touching because man, your mom and your grandmother spent a lot of time with me in the nursery,
Mm-hmm.
and I do remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always, I don't know if you remember the Blue Bible Stories
Mm-hmm.
book
Yeah.
that would always either be in a nursery,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was one always at a doctor's office.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she would always do and it's around this time, but man, she would always do the birth of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
She would read that story to me of the birth of Christ and what Mary and Joseph had to go through, and just, I'll never forget that.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that will be instilled in my heart and in my brain probably until I pass.
Yeah. And I think I take for granted too, we always sat on that back row. And Grandma always sat, or sat up, as she would say, sat up there at the front.
She did.
And but I will say that usually when we sat in the back there, we always sat back there with Cliff.
And we cut up.
And it was always just funny. I mean, if I could just go back, and I guess that's what I miss a lot too, is just if I could go back in time to where it was just when the.
Well,
like,
I know that we're talking about our grandparents, but do you
Yeah.
remember Nita and Cliff and who else would be back there? It'd be Robbie.
Yep, Robbie.
But it would also be man, that's bad. I forget her name because she's one of the main ones. She used to be the secretary over there. Lorraine.
Yeah.
Lorraine.
Mm-hmm.
And that broke my heart that I just forgot her name that quickly. But Lorraine, it was a special woman as well.
Mm-hmm.
All of them would sit in the back because they would always have a Super Bowl party.
Yeah.
And I remember, you might have been too young for this one for sure. But man, I remember Cliff because it was leading up to the 95 football, the 95 NFL big Super Bowl time. And it was going to be Steelers versus Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was listening to, I think Lynn Gardner was the pastor at that time. And Lynn was preaching always in the back and everything, and just would always look back at us. And I was sitting back there. Well, Cliff had this little TV. It was a portable TV that came out in the 90s and stuff that had the big antenna.
The big antenna, yeah.
He'd have it down here with the big antenna like this and have an earphone. I can't throw an interception. And you could see them, Nita sitting here busting out laughing at them. Everybody is just laughing up a storm, and Pastor Gardner is up there preaching. But man, I think Harold was even there too.
Mm-hmm.
But man, it was a sight to see because man, I was young.
Mm-hmm.
I was young and watching all that
Mm-hmm.
and just cutting up
Yeah.
and knowing that we took that even for granted. I mean, even though
Yeah.
that they were laughing and cutting up, where were we?
Yeah.
We were at church.
Mm-hmm.
We knew where we had to be.
Yeah.
We knew that we needed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just because of the fact that, okay, our family is wanting us to be there. It's more of, and we really need to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
We really need to be a part of where God needs us
Mhm.
right now. And that was one main factor that was there. I have only a few more questions for you. Because we talked about a lot of things. Now, there's a part right here that's going to switch.
Okay.
We talked about Sundays. We talked about how today's generation family is dying. We talked about that. But we didn't talk about this. And I was gearing towards it just now. Did you see where Jesus was molded into our family and was our center focus? And if so, how?
I mean, it was a requirement to go every Sunday. And I mean, it wasn't a if you were going, like, you better be there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was just every Sunday. And I mean, Papa drove the bus for I don't know how long. I mean, he drove it
Oh, I
all the way up
remember
until he
before
couldn't.
Burgess, Before
you know?
Burgess did.
Yeah.
And then Burgess, you know, boom,
Yeah. And that was just part of it. And I'm pretty sure they'd go every Sunday night and Wednesday night.
Yeah.
But even then, it was also like the times you're talking about, like how your grandma would always read, you know.
Yes.
And I would always see grandma. She had her Bible, and she had like a stand right beside her recliner, and her Bible was always right there. And her time that she always read was usually right after the stories. And so she would watch the stories with everything. So a lot of times she'd get dinner started up, and she would be in the kitchen doing things, cleaning up from breakfast and all that, and then sit down and watch the stories. And then she would get in there and do her little devotional
Yes.
right after that. And she would have that little daily bread that they'd always have. And
That
they'd
wasn't
have,
just them. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know if your mama did the same thing, but man, or does the same thing currently, but man, before my mom passed, she was still getting the daily bread.
Yeah.
She was getting it so often to where, because they would do it in 3-month quarters instead of doing it at the times that they used to do it.
Right.
Man, those I remember seeing those often over at Mom's house.
Right.
And just her spending time in the Word.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And even when we got older and Cody and I were teenagers, you know, we could actually, Papa wanted us to usher
Yes.
at the church. And he didn't flat out ask us to usher. He basically
Told
told us we were going to be ushering. And we were like, okay. And it was just funny because those are fun memories too, because we'd be back there cutting up. And it would be the old guys would always sit, the old gentlemen would always be right there on the right. They'd all sit together in the back. They'd sit on the back right side.
And you'd have Isaac
And
right there.
Isaac
well,
and
Isaac
Cutter
would
and
be
all
on
them.
there, but
Yeah.
it would be, Isaac would be like right here about to fall asleep and messing with his candy.
Because he'd be over there and you'd be, especially if you're on the right side where they were
especially
at.
if you're sitting by him.
Yes, if you were sitting beside him, you'd hear him, he'd reach in his pocket like that. And he'd be leaning real I mean, he'd almost lean out the pew. And he'd be leaning out, and you'd hear him, and then
And I
he'd
love
get
it
it out.
because of his, you remember his, he had a pocket watch too.
Yeah.
He had a long pocket watch where it was there too. And man, that was a dapper man.
Yeah.
And I say that, and I mean that. Like, he had some, he would always have his hair in line. A messy truck, messy house, but man,
but he looked sharp.
He looked sharp, and he didn't care. He'd have his hair all gelled up.
Yeah.
It wasn't gelled, but all that stuff that he put in it.
But you'd pull out that candy, and you'd be sitting there, and he'd just slide his hand up beside you. He'd be like, "You want a piece?" And the thing is you had to learn to just say yeah and just take a piece.
Yes.
Because if you didn't, he'd be like, "Oh no, take a piece." And you're like,
he'd
"No,
be
I'm good."
loud.
And be like, "No, take a piece." And that's the thing. He would get louder if you said no, and then it's like in church, so it's like you're trying to be quiet, and then they're like, you know, and it would just be funny. And I remember times too, we'd be sitting over there, and I was sitting instead of ushering where I was on the right side, I was on the left side one Sunday, and the old men were over there, and I think it was Pastor Waddell at that time. And he was like, "Let us pray." And we had just started church good. So they was over there still catching up from the week, you know. And you're talking this and that. And they'd already started praying, you know. And so it got real quiet. But then they're all over there still just carrying on conversation.
Cackling.
And I remember Stephen saying this and looked over, he said, like that. He said, "Dog." And it was just, but I just remember that. And of course, Jason was right beside me when that happened. And me and Jason was just sitting there dying laughing because we were just like, golly.
But
And it
some
was
of the
just
stuff that we've seen.
Yes.
And that's another story for another day too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Jason and I could tell you some of the stories that we've seen. Lord. But yes, I can say that it didn't just shape us at church, it shaped us at home.
Right.
Grandma was very concerned about our salvation at a very young age.
Right.
And would talk to us about Jesus. I remember she was folding clothes, putting Cliff's clothes up one day, and just, man, she was making his bed and just asked me. And I didn't know how to answer. I had to be about 5 or 6. Do you know Jesus? I mean, I didn't know how to answer. I said, I know. I remember telling her that I like going to church, and that was the normal answer for a lot of people. They didn't know Jesus personally, but man, she was adamant about. I know I use that word a lot, but man, it's over and over again to where their hearts were just totally wanting you to know something, which means they were on you constantly about things. And I could say that it bothered her. And she prayed. When she prayed for salvations of other people. And I could say that even with the things that went on between my mom and my dad for their divorce, and how hurtful those times were. My grandmother prayed for him probably until she passed, over and over and over again. And I can say that she meant it. It might have been hurtful during the time because they were disagreeing about a lot of things about how Nikki and I needed to be raised. And just hearing that and hearing her broken heart, broken spirit about not just your salvation, but just praying and hearing her voice. I can hear it, and it just makes me choked up a bit just thinking about it. But she special woman, and I can say that both of us, you and I, because I know your grandmother was very similar about things that needed to be instilled in your life. But man, it was more about Jesus. It was not just church. A lot of people always think, especially whenever they think of us, it's Long Branch or Spring Day. But man, it's not just that. And they always think about some kind of gospel group or something like that somebody wants to do so. The Benenhaley crowd, that's what they think about. Man, it's more than that. And I could say that, you could say that. That about scared the mess out of me. But man, it's, I don't know how you feel about that, but man, it's just something.
Well, and I feel like it was such a closeness that we all had, and it was founded in that, and founded in Christianity and going to church and doing those things, and it was like, that was just a normal. It wasn't
a chore.
Right.
It was just almost like something that was the norm.
Right. Like you knew where they would all be at on a certain day at a certain time. And even like I'd have friends that would, want us to come and hang out or spend the night or something on a Saturday night. And I'd say, well, we can't go because we're going to church the next day.
I remember Mom picking me up several times for church and saying that my family goes to church. And either they can go with you,
right,
or they're coming with us, or they can stay at our house and your child can go to church with us. And Mom would say that every now and then, and again, that's another story for another time. But man, where we grew up, and I got to be careful with how I approach that, because I want to do that more with my sister, because there's stories there that need to be told by her and not me. Right. And that's the key thing there is right now what we're doing. You've said this before too. And we might be talking about a lot of things, but we're not going to overstep.
Right.
We're not going to be saying something that's not our story.
Right.
And right now, this is our story. But to be able to share our story and say that Christ is a part of that, because I didn't get to know Christ until probably I was later on. It was later on in my life whenever you actually met me again. Whenever I was over at Long Branch for was around the time whenever Lynn was interim pastor over there. And I realized that I wasn't living right. Papa was telling me definitely, Bo, you ain't living right. And if you're gonna stay in my house, you're gonna go to church. And I realized that I was drinking a lot. I was doing a lot of things with my friends that I shouldn't have been doing. And man, it tore me up because I remember Lynn preaching, and I remember just sobbing. Because I knew that all those times before I wasn't saved. And I was living whatever I wanted to live and however I wanted to live. But yeah, I wouldn't have had that time and wouldn't have actually made it even fruitful without the love of Christ and the love from our family, from the people at Long Branch. And I miss that, and I know you do too, because that's hard to say, especially right now, because we want to see it grow and flourish.
Right.
But
And I feel like there was just a certain humbleness that most of the Turks carried with them. Like none of them were boastful or proud or anything like that. They were just very humble servants of Christ, if that makes any sense for a lot of the older Turks.
no, it makes perfect sense.
And
Because you didn't get a lot of time with Ernest, but like I say, the one that really comes out the most for me is Ernest Benenhaley. And I think of that, and that was John Mark, that was my grandfather's papa's brother, and man, he was stern, but loving. And some of the stories I've heard of him, even during the times that were rough for our family during the Long Branch and Springbank time. Again, not details of that yet,
Right.
but
Yeah.
that just that tore me apart to hear some of those stories and how humble he actually was during that time.
And I mean, you could hear it too, especially like, and I guess I wish I'd have had like a recording of one of them, you know, Papa or Grandma, especially Grandma too, and just how humble they were in their prayers when they would pray,
Yes.
especially like just at the dinner table, and just the little things they were just so thankful for, and like, you know, just to hear that again, what I would do if I had like a.
It's so strange because Papa was a loud man. You remember that?
Yeah.
Hey, Bo.
Yeah.
But anytime he prayed, it
would get softer, and it would
very
just,
soft.
Yeah.
And it was strange to hear. But Grandma was a little bold with the way that she prayed. You can hear her. She was humble, but she was very intimate. That's the word that I could use for her.
Right.
And it was different. It was like, I know this. I know this man that I'm praying to. And it was like, I know that he has the power to do what I'm asking. It was a different time period, and we don't hear that a lot these days, that people believe that, or go to a closet to pray, or pray alone in your home.
Right.
It's all about praying in front of people, things like that. But do you pray at home?
Right.
Do you open your Bible at home? Do you do things like that? I mean, I know that that's sometimes a struggle for most of us, but they made it look so easy.
I mean, it was just
turn it
it
off,
was
just
something that
turn
they did every
everything off.
day. Yeah. And it was just instilled in them that that's what they did every single day. And even like I know, and I remember this because it hit me like a ton of bricks one day. My Uncle Al was teaching Sunday school, and we were there one day, and he was talking, and he said, "How many of y'all have to you know, when you get your Bible out on Sunday, you get the Bible, and you get it, you have to go and wipe the dust off of it. And that thing
that probably
hit
bothered
me.
you.
It bothered me so bad, and I remember that vividly because it bothered me so bad. And I'm like, wow, like I need to really do better and read my Bible. And it's like, you know, how we take for granted, and we get so busy in our lives in a day, and even like now, I think of like how busy I am and what I do. But then it's like thinking about that and thinking about these stories and like all the things they had to do, but they still took that time
Yes.
to do that.
Well, I think that this is going to be it.
Okay.
No, I have one more.
All right.
If you could actually speak with her right now,
Mm.
that is the hardest question probably of the night, and this is going to be our last question.
Okay.
If you could say anything to her right now, just speak to her. What is the one sentence that you would say?
Mm-hmm. I'd probably say, do you want to see your great grandson? Is probably what I'd say.
Mine would be very similar, and she missed out on Lillie. I know we'll see her soon. She missed out on Carrick and Addie, and I just
Yeah.
it's harder even now to say
Mm-hmm.
because Addie talks about mom now.
Mm-hmm.
It just breaks me down.
Mm-hmm.
And with her only being 2,
Yeah.
this is like she understands. And I know it tears up my sister because Nikki was very close to Grandma. I was close to Grandma,
Mm-hmm.
but I was very close to Cliff as well.
Mhm.
Cliff was my best uncle, and I could say that. But and I spent a lot of time with Papa.
Mm-hmm.
But I could say Nikki spent a lot of time with Grandma.
Yeah.
And the stories she could probably tell right now
Mm-hmm.
would be remarkable. But yes, that would be very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably where we would be. Thank you
Yeah.
for sitting with me
Yeah,
all
man.
this time. And we're going to do it again
Okay.
because we're going to talk some more about some other things. This started with us as an idea,
Yeah.
and we're going to progress to where we find some others to where we can talk to as well.
Okay.
But man, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Love you, man.
Love you too.